boys and girls, and welcome to the concession stand here on the KB Radio Network. I am your host, Kevin Reed, and this is yet again another double feature episode where we will be reviewing not one, but two films that are currently available for your viewing pleasure. And the first one we're going to review today is a film that's on Netflix. It was released in theaters, I think, a couple of weeks ago, and it finally premiered on Netflix, and it is Hitman, which stars Glen Powell, and the horror film The Strangers Chapter 1. And I wanted to see both of these films. They were on my honorable mentions of this year to check out, and got to check them out over the weekend. And so let's jump right into them. Let's start with the Netflix film Hitman, as I mentioned, starring Glen Powell, who has been on kind of a renaissance as of late. Just recently was in the hit film Anyone But You with Sydney Sweeney. Later on this summer, he will be in Twisters, a kind of a reboot or sequel or whatever it is. Nobody has definitively said exactly what it is to the 90s classic film Twister. But we get a film that not only is he starring in, but he also co-wrote this film with the director Richard Linklater, and he has given us such classics as Dazed and Confused and School of Rock, to mention a few. But he teams up with Glen Powell, both Texas boys, and so it only makes sense to have a film set in New Orleans. But hey, I appreciate it. It was good to see all of the locations that I know and love here in New Orleans in this film. But this is an action black comedy, and that's what they categorize it as. But there's no action in this movie, and I wasn't expecting any. But it was just funny that they linked it up with an action comedy when there's zero action. But the premise of Hitman, it follows an undercover New Orleans police contractor who poses as a reliable hitman as he tries to save a woman in need. This film, I felt, was a showcase, or at least an attempt for Glen Powell to showcase his chameleon side. You know, he got the chance to play like 5 different characters, posing as a hitman for different people and stuff like that. I thought it was very interesting. And then I watched the movie. This movie disappointed me. I was expecting a little bit more. I wasn't expecting action. I just wanted a really good story. Now, there was a interesting story there. It just didn't quite get there. I think Glen Powell is one of those movie stars, you know, that's on the uprise. He has the qualities. He has the good looks. He has the charm. He has that charisma. He has it all. And you can see it in this film, you know, especially when he's switching characters and playing around with that. Very good. He did a good job. He wasn't the problem per se, but he was the problem per se, you know, because he wrote this film. And so I can't really give him flowers without also throwing dirt on him as well. This film took too long to get to the point. It's not a long movie, but it felt long. This movie felt like it was 3 hours long, when in actuality it was closer to 2. I don't think it was quite 2 hours, but it just felt like it was 3 hours long. And then we didn't really get to the meat of the plot until much late into the story. Maybe the second half of the second act did we really start to get the story, and at least the story that was advertised for this film. I thought it was pretty messy, to be honest with you. I think that really falls on the direction. And Richard Linklater is a awesome director. Awesome. You heard the names that I mentioned. You know, Dazed and Confused is a classic. You know, School of Rock, very funny film with Jack Black. But this film was all over the place, especially when we get to the climax of this film. It's like a complete shift in tone. an entire shift in tone that made no sense. It came out of nowhere, and it, I'm sitting there like, okay, is he the hero? Glenn Powell, is his character the hero? He's supposed to be the hero. Well, there's nobody to cheer for in this movie. Nobody. No, there are no good people in this movie. At the end of the day, even though Glenn Powell's character is a good person throughout until the last 5 minutes. And it was a shift that really made no sense at the end of the day. And I just, it took me completely out. I was really disappointed. I was willing to go along with it because it was a little slow, little small, contained film. Nothing to blow your socks off, but it's a good watch. It was a good watch for the most part. And then there's I gotta mention this. It just popped in my head. I have to mention this. As a lifelong New Orleanian, I cannot stand when Hollywood it being obsessed with Cajun accents, with the Orcadian accent, Bayou type accents. Gotta put it in every movie that is set in New Orleans. We do not talk like that. We don't talk like that. Now, there are people. New Orleans is a gumbo pot. Not to, no pun intended. It's a big gumbo pot. You get a variety of all kind of accents down here. But the Cajun dialect is not the primary accent. It's really no primary accent, and not everybody in the film spoke that way. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that, but there are a few characters that kind of threw it out. I'm like, come on, man. Come on. And they laid it on thick with it. You could tell it's phony. I guess if you're not from here, it doesn't bother you. But being from here, it bothers you. At least it bothers me. And so that really just, I don't know, man. It just rubs salt in the wound for me. But, it's a decent film. It's worth a watch. But this is nothing I would, watch again. I've seen it. I'm good, and I can move on. Hitman, which is currently on Netflix, gets a letter grade of a C minus. Yeah, it kind of let me down. I was expecting a comedy, a black comedy, and also failed to mention this was loosely based on a true story. This guy, this is his actual facts here. And so that really disturbs me. If they followed the story verbatim for the truth, that's disturbing. It's very disturbing. And then at the end of the film, they celebrated the guy, telling the guy's story and whatnot, at the end credits. And I'm like, really? After you just left us with this? Now you want to lift him up? It was just weird. But yeah, Hitman gets a C minus. All right, let's move over to our next film to review, and it is none other than the third film in this franchise, even though it's kind of a relaunch of this franchise, The Strangers, Chapter 1. Yes, this is the first installment of this relaunch of this franchise. It's like a standalone trilogy because they made not one, not two, but three films in this little standalone trilogy. Technically, you can say it's one long movie because they shot this film and the other two back to back, all together. So they're all linked together. And this is the first part of that trilogy, Chapter 1. The film is directed by Rennie Harlin, who has given us some awesome action films in the 90s into the early 2000s, even in the 90s. It was more Die Hard 2, Cliffhanger, The Long Kiss Goodnight, movies like that. He is an awesome action director. At least he was. He's kind of been quiet the last, I don't know, 10, 20 years, I guess you can go back to say. But he really cut his teeth. Where he got his start was in horror. One of the first American films that he made was A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, The Dream Master. So that was I don't know, around that time, that was like one of the best sequels in that film franchise, it still holds up. I really do enjoy part four in that franchise. He also made Deep Blue Sea, which you can qualify as a horror film. You know, Jaws on steroids, and I thought that was an awesome movie as well. And so he's diving back into this horror genre with The Strangers, Chapter One, and this film follows a couple who come in contact with three psychopathic masked strangers while they're on a world trip. This film is basically the first film. You know, the strangers are the strangers. It's nothing new. There's no mystical thing about it. There's nothing supernatural about the strangers when it comes to horror. This is more psychological. This is what makes the strangers scary, is the fact that this could actually happen. Or to be more accurate, this actually happens. You know, you know, with home invasions and stuff like that. It's a very scary thing. And it freaks me out. And so that's what really scares me about this particular film franchise. And with the original one, which starred I think it was Liv Tyler and what was the I'm blanking on his name. I think his last name was Speedman. Is it Scott Speedman? I think so. I know his last name was Speedman. But anyways, that first film was really good. Really, really good. I loved it for what it was. And this film, it's basically that. it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. I don't remember the second film, Strangers Pray by Night. I do recall watching it, but I don't remember anything about it, which tells me that it wasn't that good. But I don't want to say that because I don't remember it. I remember nothing about it, but I do remember the first one, and that first film is so good. And for this film to come out and basically do the same thing to a degree, this was more of a teen horror film type feel, one of those Blumhouse type feel movies. It just didn't have that same pizzazz as psychological thriller / horror that The Strangers had. And if you're gonna make 3 films back to back and release them all within, I guess, a few months of themselves, because Chapter 2 comes out later this year, and I think Chapter 3 maybe early next year. They didn't give a date for Chapter 3, but the first one had to knock it out the park. The first one had to be bananas good in order to get you excited for the next 2, and I'm not. I'm not excited for this film. It's a 20-minute concept that they stretched out to an hour and 30 minutes. They stretched it out, and it felt it. It felt stretched out. This could have been resolved in 10 minutes, this movie. And they just stretched it out so far. Now, that being said, we didn't get to the house and to the conflict until late in the movie. We had so much setup that had nothing to do with the movie, mind you, or the story, I should say. It had nothing to do with the story, but they spent so much time with that. Now, it could, going forward, because like we said, there are 2 more films coming out. So I'm assuming all that stuff that they were planting seeds for in the first 45 minutes of this film, we're going to revisit in Chapter 2 and in Chapter 3. I get all that, but the movie, this particular movie, needed to kind of stand on his own, without setting up, and it just felt like a setup movie. Now, I know it's a setup movie. I understand it's a setup movie, but I didn't want it to feel like a setup movie. And now, they had some pretty decent jump scares in here. I think the jump scares were done right, and that's pretty difficult if you think about it, because not too many movies, as of late, can pull off jump scares other than James Wan. James Wan is the only one who is consistent with the jump scares, and nobody else. Now, Rennie Harlan did an excellent job with the jump scares, but That's it. That's the only benefit of this film. Some really good jump scares that was set up perfectly. The way he moved the camera around this house, and the close-ups, and slightly moving it to the left, and you can see a silhouette of somebody standing behind our lead characters and all this. That was done very well, and really saved this movie from being hot garbage, to be honest with you. But other than that, there's really nothing to write home and tell mom about. I mean, our actors did pretty good here. Our lead, the female lead, Madeline Pets, was pretty good in here. The male lead, Freud Garcia or Gomez. I'm pretty sure I butchered it. I know I butchered it. I'm pretty sure. I know for certain I butchered his last name. But they did a pretty good job. They did the best they could with what they were given. It is, nothing that you're going to see in the Oscars. They're not going to contend for any awards at the end of the year, but they did the best they could for this particular film. Overall, I think it's decent. It's not horrible. It's not a horrible horror film. The story moves pretty rapidly. Like I said, it's only 90 minutes long, so it's not. It doesn't drag. It just felt like a setup film for the rest. We had to get through this to get to the real meat of the story. And if I'm gonna spend my hard-earned money, I don't want to wait. I spent my money on this. I want to get some story here. There's more they could have set up for the other films that they didn't. I guess they're leaving that for chapter 2, which they're going to set up chapter 3. And so, that's my big thing with it. But other than that, it's once again, it's watchable. It's one of these films you can watch at night, late at night, curled up, you and your significant other. It's one of those type of films, and you would enjoy it because it has some really decent jump scares. Honestly, it's really, really good with the jump scares. And so, for that, I give The Strangers Chapter 1 a letter grade of a C. Yeah, I mean, it's average. It's an average horror film. And horror films, as of late, is not a high bar to clear in order to please me because they've been so bad. In comparisons of other films that have come out in the past, 20 years, it's hard to get a really good horror film. So this was, and I guess I'll take it. But those are the reviews. Hitman is currently on Netflix, and The Strangers Chapter 1 is available on digital. I would like to know, did you check out either one of these films or both? And how did you feel about them? Or do you plan to check them out? Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also search for the show on all social media platforms. Just search for the KB Radio Network. Also, don't forget about subscribing to the KB Radio Network channel and liking this video if you don't mind. Also, don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to the Concession Stand here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me for this double feature of reviews here on the Concession Stand. Can't wait to speak to you on the next go around. I want you all to know that I love you, continue to love everyone, and until we speak again, you all be blessed.